Welcome, everyone, to our very first Art of the Possible Blab session. And I'm excited about this because SAP is really investing a lot in getting in front of not only our customers, but our prospects and the technology ecosystem. And we wanted to make sure, in addition to the physical events that we're putting on, that we also are getting in front of our virtual audience. And so today marks our first Blab session, and we're really going to extend the conversations that we've had at our physical events across North America. And so we'll actually send you to a landing page. So if you're interested in attending one of our events, we'll send you to a landing page. If you're interested in learning more about some of the subjects that we discussed today, we'll also send you to a landing page where you can watch videos and consume content. But today I'm really happy to be joined by Dion Hinchcliffe, who is a very well-known figure in the technology world. And he is currently the Chief Strategy Officer at Seven Summits. So welcome, Dion. Thanks for joining us on Blab today.
Absolutely. I wouldn't miss it, Nick. Looking forward to the conversation and appreciate the invite.
And I got a lot of good feedback about your presentation in Chicago. And so that's why I'm really excited to have you here today, because I think your messages are going to resonate with our audience as well as the technology and CIO world. And we're seeing a lot of shifts in how IT is viewed, as well as shifts in the strategy of IT. So I'd love for you to give us a little bit more background on yourself, and then I have a couple of questions for you that we can use to guide the conversation.
Yeah, you bet. So as far as my background, I've spent the last 25 years, I guess now, working on the cutting edge of technology, whatever the next big thing is. That's kind of been my industry focus. And I've tried to bring as many people along that journey. I've been fortunate to be the lead or involved in some of the largest IT projects in the world, such as the Missile Defense Program. Worked head of IT for a large mutual fund company. And so I know how hard it is to solve business problems with technology. And I've been more recently kind of exploring that as an analyst, a researcher. I still consult actively, though, with the C-suite, primarily the CIO and the Chief Digital Officer, sometimes the CMO, working on that hot topic of today, digital transformation, which is what most companies have to be much more like technology companies. And so I write a column for ZDNet. I've written a couple books on this topic that have done fairly well. And I'm privileged to say I have a front row seat. I get to travel around the whole world and look at what companies are doing, see how what's working, what's not working, and begin, and this is what we're here to talk about, beginning to see some new patterns in the industry.
By the way, before we get into the questions, I remember speaking to you before this session, and you were saying that, did you say you travel 250,000 miles a year? Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible.
Much as, yeah. Yeah, this year I'll probably beat that. I've already done 70,000.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. So in Chicago, you talked a little bit about decentralization and how we might be too centralized at this point. And in order for digital transformation to really take hold of an organization, we need to decentralize. So could you go into that a little bit?
Sure. So we began to notice that the backlogs of IT departments began to grow to the point that the people in the business stopped asking. And we've been seeing a broad shift in technology budgets moving out of the IT department into the lines of business, because as technology gets into everything that we do, one single department, which is just a small, typically the IT budget's between 5 and 10% of the whole organization, usually closer to 5. How could that little group, when compared to the size of the company, drive broad enablement in everything that organization does? So there's a need for many more applications, many more digital touch points, much more activity in digital places, digital channels. And if we're trying to use that traditional old school, we have one department that's kind of in charge of all that, but it's a very small part of our organization, yet we're going to use much more technology than in the past. We began to see that breaking down. And so when I looked at success stories for organizations that are keeping up with technology change fairly well, they seem to have some broad aspects in common that most other organizations don't have. And that one is that they really empower people in the organization, what we call change agents. That's a popular hashtag that talks about this, is the change agents hashtag. And that is saying, can we give the tools to people who are closer to the problem? We've seen example organizations like the Federal Communications Commission with their new CIO, or newer CIO, David Bray, who's one of the leading lights. And he said, we've got too much to do and not much time to do it, not many resources. We need everyone to help pull on that rope of change. And they people in different corners of the organization understand the problems there much better. But if we could give them the support, the enablement, the tools for change. And so we see these Center of Excellence was the model we used, but they quickly became bogged down too. So now these new network-based models saying, can we build a community of digital transformation to allow more people to get involved and drive broader change?
It really reminds me, because I've been in the social media space for about 7 years at this point. I remember starting out, it's completely centralized because people just weren't, lessons weren't learned yet. And people were afraid. There's a lot of uncertainty around how it could help a business. So it's centralized in what's called a social media team. Whereas over time, we realized that model didn't scale, and that's not really what consumers wanted. They wanted to interact one-to-one with employees. So, now with social, we're giving people tools and we're giving people training to be able to use social media properly and to speak on behalf of the company. So it sounds a lot like that. Does that sound right?
Oh, that's exactly right. And that is one of the proofs that this kind of works. So we see the very successful employee advocacy programs, customer advocacy programs. It's the same thing. It's, can we use these networks and communities to come together, and we give our advocates the software techniques. We train them. We even certify them in many cases. And we see large companies like Fidelity and Dell have thousands of these. The Sprint Ninjas program. So it's a simple model because IT is a little more complicated than social typically, but it's the same idea. Exactly right.
Yeah. So anytime you start something new, or even when you design a program to enable employees to adopt digital or even social, you have to get leadership on board. So can you take our listeners and our watchers through what it takes to get leadership on board and what type of conversations you should be having?
Yeah, and that's usually the most frustrating aspect of digital transformation. We see from, I would say, it looks like Michael Krigsman just joined, and he's giving me lots of props. Hi, Michael.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Welcome, Michael.
But the great frustration is not having leadership understand what the issue is, and getting them on board. And we know that leadership can drive digital transformation about 2.5 times faster than it just happening kind of from a bottom up or in the middle of the organization, where it tends to become very fragmented and can, there's a lot of headwinds when you do it that way. So getting an executive sponsor, or ideally finding an executive who will drive this as part of their personal agenda, will help. And usually the best way to do that is to find out from your executive team what their top priorities for the year are, and align that effort with what they've got, what they owe their stakeholders, right, which is the board of directors and the shareholders, what they've already promised them, and say, this will help us with that. And almost always, I've rarely seen it where you can't take the top corporate priorities from a business standpoint and saying, here's how we can use digital change, digital transformation to dramatically improve the results in that area. And you can't promise too much because digital transformation can take a while. One of the things I talked about in Chicago was that it can take, Nordstrom invested for 5 years before they saw a real return. So you need to find something, get some quick wins, as some early pilots or experiments that will prove that you're on the right path while you're doing something big that will support executive priorities. And now you have alignment with the goals of the top leaders, and they looking at you as a resource that can help them. That's the fastest way to get the support that you're looking for.
What would you suggest when it comes to getting quick wins? Are there, maybe 2 to 3 areas that a company should start where where you think they might be able to get the biggest bang for their buck?
It's customer experience, hands down. So digital transformation has to talk about business models, operations, and your customer experience. But it's on that intersection between the organization and the marketplace that the most value can be created, and usually where most organizations are very behind. So there's always typically a long list of things your customers would love to see from a digital standpoint, whether that's better and more interesting and useful mobile applications, or being able to get much better help and for the products and services in social channels, or creating a customer community that can drive innovation, can help with marketing, and drive customer care. So there's a number of things that you can do that are relatively inexpensive, have big bang for the buck, can show that you've done something, and can have measurable impact to the organization. And so I think really focusing there. If you really improve operations somewhere in the organization using these tools, that part of the organization will respect it. No one else will really see it, but everyone sees improvements to customer experience.
Yeah, so let's talk about customer experience for a little bit. I know for a lot of bigger companies, the challenge is getting out of the silos. And, could you give our listeners and our viewers a couple of tips about cross-functional collaboration? I know there's no silver bullet by any means, and a lot of that takes reorganizing businesses. But what have you seen in the marketplace, and what kind of tips can you give to leaders out there?
Yeah, so it comes back to the way to bring everyone together is to say we're going to work together and pool ideas and resources. So most parts of the organization, the different leaders don't have enough people, they don't have enough time individually to drive the large changes that they want in the organization. Even if they have an executive sponsor, you really need to pool your efforts and get them all on the same page. And so we see digital transformation works better when you've brought those senior change agents together and say, can you guys work together? Can we work together? I want to improve the customer experience in this way. Let's kind of cross over your area, and it'll be made better if we work together on it. So let's pool what we're doing and pool our talent. Even though the real challenge of doing that is that the timelines and deadlines don't often line up, and that can be a challenge. In fact, it's going to be the top one you have to manage. But that's building that broader alignment, and then having that executive sponsor who can crack a little bit heads if necessary, saying, you need to work together. I will create the air cover for you to line up your deadlines and schedules and get everyone behind it. Burberry did a fantastic digital transformation a few years ago, 2011, 2012, by Angela Ahrendts, who now runs Apple Stores. But it was a tremendous success story, and it was largely accomplished. The big pieces were done in just 1 year because you had the CEO saying, I need all hands on deck. You guys got to work together. All this stuff has to work together. We're going to roll out these new technologies. We're going to engage our customers, and we're going to be much more successful. And they were able to report at the end of that year significantly better financial results.
Now, let's talk a little bit about digital transformation from, let's say it's the chief security officer or the CFO's perspective. What would you say are the major risks, whether they be data or financial? What have you seen in the marketplace that people have been asking about and are concerned with?
Yeah, security is the biggest problem of our time. Security and privacy, and complying with, especially if you're a global company, complying with overseas privacy laws, where a lot of the customer data must stay in the country of origin. You really have to think, if you're a global company, you have to think about security globally, and that's a real challenge. And the CFO is not going to like you for two reasons. One, because you need to invest a lot more than most organizations are today. Is as you move into these channels, you need to, in order to grow, in order to even survive, you have to do this. It's an imperative. But most companies aren't going to go out of business tomorrow, right? So it's been difficult to get the budgets until recently with security, which is the only thing that business and IT leaders agree on as the digital transformation priority is security. The CFO is really the one you have to work with and have a really smart, midterm business plan, because you're going to ask for a lot of money. Typically, if you look at digital native companies, they spend over twice what traditional companies do on IT, because They know that that's the business. Technology is the business. And so most organizations have been underspending by about half for the last decade. How do you catch up? There's a giant hole that's formed in front of most companies that they can't get across that chasm until they fill it. So they're behind on technology infrastructure. Everyone in most organizations say our IT is old, our systems are outdated. We're not moving to these new channels quickly enough. But technology companies like Facebook and Amazon and Google generally don't say that. They're leading, right? But they spend a lot more on IT. So this is a very tough conversation you have to have with the CFO, saying the technology budget, not just in IT, but across the organization, has to get much bigger if you're planning to be a digital leader. And if you're not a digital leader, pretty soon you're not going to be a business leader. And that is true in many industries already, like financial services.
Cool. So I'm actually going to take a question from the chat room. So Michael Krigsman asks, how can companies run two business models at the same time? So the historical and then the transformative business models. In fact, at SAP, we have two different businesses. We have SAP Digital, and then we have our traditional software business. So great question, Michael. And it looks like we might have lost Dion. That's live video for you folks. I'm sure he'll be dialing back in though. That's a good question though, Michael. I was actually going to ask that in about 5 minutes, but you beat me to it. There you are. You have returned.
Great.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Apologies for that.
Okay.
Looks like we're back.
No worries. That's live video for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Michael says Blab is not really enterprise ready.
Well, but so is half of the technology that we're all using in business today. It didn't used to be that way, right? So we've gone all consumerized. I would agree with him. It's not ready for producing a let's say a live TV show, but for this kind of stuff, it'll get us through.
Yeah. So I think right when you dropped off, Michael asked a really great question about operating two businesses side by side. And SAP, we're doing it with SAP Digital, and then we have our traditional business. So love to hear your thoughts on whether that's the right approach, what other companies are doing, and what we might see in the future as some of these side-by-side businesses morph and take some of the best practices from the digital businesses and take it and integrate it into the traditional businesses.
Yeah, I began to see this problem about 6-7 years ago. So when you had the first really big traditional companies creating these digital arms. And what happened, they soon discovered they had to have the same caliber of executive talent on the digital side, right? And a lot of the same roles, but people who really understood digital. So you had duplicate leadership teams. Yet the digital side was maybe only 5 or 10% of the revenue. And so there was this real questioning, like, why do we need these very expensive, high caliber executive teams on the digital side when it's such a small part of our business? And I used to be asked to come in and we would do an analysis saying, should we kill the digital side? Because it looked like such a sideshow to them, even though we would show, we'll plot this forward 10 years, right? This is going to be your main business, right? That's why you're doing it. But they look at the hit they're taking on their quarterly sheets. And this is the big disadvantage traditional companies have against startups. The investors in Facebook, they wanted to get their returns, but they were willing to wait 6, 7, 8 years. And that's, by the way, how long it takes to really get anywhere with digital. And so some companies, Bezos is famous for taking severe heat from Wall Street for saying, I need to grow and I need to pour every dime I have into the most valuable investment we have, which is us. So we're not going to take our profits for a good long while. You want to come along for the ride? And it really has hurt their share price, although it's come up quite a bit recently. But this is the challenge that we've had. And so organizations need to, this is that tough conversation with the CFO again, saying we've underinvested in digital, right? We haven't built the right teams. So you do need to run two companies for a while, but then they can merge. So you see these, I was at Mobile World Congress a few weeks ago, and I was in the front row when they had the CEO of Ford come up saying, hey, we're a software company. we're a digital company. You know, we have we're and they were launching the new Ford Developer Network, and so this is their traditional business CEO saying this. So we're seeing that you do have these two parallel tracks. You need to have people who really understand digital on the digital management team, because that's not typically on the traditional management team. Then at some point, you can, during the transformation process, you can knit those teams together more and more until they become, you essentially have completed that transition. Even though you have to digitally transform forever now, right? There's no end. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But at some point, you can at least bring those top parts of the organization together.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of commercial. I think it might have aired 6 to 8 months ago. It was the General Electric commercial about the millennial software developer that was saying, I'm a developer for trains and planes, and the friends were like, oh, you mean for? Well, I think it was before he said that they were saying, oh, are you developing cool messaging apps, and are you doing the next Poke app? And he's like, no, I'm doing trains and planes, and they're like, huh, interesting. So because they think of GE as this kind of monolithic, old 100-year-old company, but they're essentially going through that same process.
Yeah, and I would argue that GE is a digital company already. They have been or one of those companies on the short list of a few that have been able to largely keep up. I'm sure that GE employees hearing me say this will point out things that they believe are not up to date. But when I compare GE to what many other companies are doing, they're light years ahead. So we're seeing organizations, very well managed organizations, are figuring this out.
Yeah. So let's shift over to skill set development. What programs have you seen, whether that's training or enablement, what type of programs have you seen work really well at companies that are maybe further along in their digital transformation journey?
The one that really started, there's a lot of things we can talk about that. You can create employee incubators. You can use a bring your own technology program. But the one that seems to be really working well is the hackathon. And the hackathon says, we're going to create an event, a point in time where we're going to try and get a lot of innovation, try and take up either our employees or our business partners or our customers or all three. And we're going to give them our data, our IT systems, and say, build something really innovative that you've always wanted to see. You always wish we had done, but we haven't had the time or the resources to do that. And we see that really spurring innovation and making it more predictable. Because you can have open APIs, you can have a service-oriented architecture, allows people to reuse and build on top of what the investments the company has made. But you're just hoping that they will come, and they will. But it's not very predictable. And the hackathon model seems to say we want to create something tangible and real now in a very short period of time that we can evaluate and test and see what the market wants. And so I'm seeing that more and more. We're seeing it in healthcare and in financial services and everywhere. Organizations realize this is kind of a repeatable, predictable model you can do on a regular basis to say, I'm going to cast a much wider net. I'm going to try and do it all of ourselves. And this is one of the things that I've been talking about in social business for so many years is the network will do most of the work. Technology companies already understand that. The biggest sites in the world are largely created from assets that their customers have provided, right? Facebook is nothing but stuff we post there. YouTube, same thing. Google is just an index of what we've already created. They're leveraging the strength of the network, and hackathons allow you to do that and really focus it on your business and what you're able to do. So I'm really excited about that model.